This, well, I brought this because I like it.
Well, hang on, you've just...
No, I like it. This is brilliant, but I like this.
Oh my god. Fuck. Corre, 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 corre. Fuck, fuck. Oh my god, no caí. Puta, fuck.
Sí, no, ay, perdón.
Ay, le paré, no. Go, 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 cerra esa mierda, cerralo. No, me quedé sin balas, Ahí está. Oh my god, Luis.
I got you, though.
Oh my god, y la chivola.
Puta, viejo.
Back 4 Blood was not well received by just about anyone on the internet. A quick glance at this video's very own recommendations will prove that. There's a great number of really popular and incredibly thorough videos out there explaining in excruciating detail why Back 4 Blood just didn't really do it for them.
To say Back 4 Blood is Left 4 Dead but not as good would be reductive, simplistic, and absolutely true.
And the biggest takeaway that I got from Back 4 Blood is that it is just so incredibly boring.
Doing a tiny bit of things better, but mostly doing things worse than the game that inspired it.
And despite the criticisms from this very vocal majority, I still gave Back 4 Blood a fair shot and had a really great time with it. I beat the game on every difficulty multiple times, invested hundreds of hours on it since launch, unlocking 5 of the 8 SWAT skins you get after beating the campaign with a specific cleaner, and it was my friend group's go-to game for a really long time.
Mira, lo vergón de la flashbang es que literalmente flasheas hasta los special. Entonces, si ves que estás, si ves que estamos surrounded de special.
However, it is still a little hard to articulate what made me get so much into it, since I can't deny that many of the criticisms that have been made towards it are more than fair.
Yep, that's me. So you're probably wondering how we got here.
And also because my feelings towards the game have fluctuated a lot based on the many tweaks and changes Turtle Rock has implemented, specifically regarding the balancing of its highest difficulty modes.
Oh my god. Oh, no entra flor. Ay, mi imagen cae en el fuego. Este juego es una mierda, cabrón.
It has very much been a love-hate relationship, but if you're able to overcome these shortcomings like I was, you'll find one of the most rewarding, replayable, and truly satisfying games in the market. Very few titles have given me a bigger sense of satisfaction and sheer triumph after beating its levels than Back 4 Blood, and if anything, I hope I can convince you to at least give the game a second look.
Granada, tira granada en el fucking... Tira granada.
No me... Ahí está. Ay, perdón si mató a alguien.
Whatever. Oh, I made it. 7 de vida, 7 de vida. Cierra la puta puerta.
Bro, literal estaba entrando, Juan. Me la tiraste en la mera cara la granada, bro. Un segundo te pudiste haber esperado que entrara, viejo.
I wouldn't have lived after that second, entonces...
Ah, cállate, Hectorito, yo me sacrifiqué por revivirte, cabrón.
Back 4 Blood is a co-op zombie shooter that tasks you and 3 of your friends to complete objectives through a series of 6 acts. It lifts its level design structure verbatim from Left 4 Dead and games like it. You're essentially plowing through waves and waves of fast zombies and completing whatever objective is required for progression while navigating large levels riddled with hazards that call in the horde, sometimes placed in some really cruel spots.
No fucking way.
Something I quite like about the game is the plethora of options you're given to deal with just about everything it throws at you. For instance, cautious players can circumvent hazards by not triggering them.
Luna, hay paro enfrente tuyo. Luna! No, te está diciendo ahorita.
Having quick reflexes, as well as by using specific guidance and skills. And with the birds, if you have a well-coordinated team, there's also the surprising option of simply shooting the fucking things before they know what hit them.
1, 2, 3.
Although it is quite risky. As you might expect, players also have to deal with considerably deadlier zombie mutations, each with a few additional variants with unique abilities and different behaviors. For instance, the wretch try to throw up on you from a vantage point and retreat once it runs out, only to come back and do it all again once it recharges.
Oh my god.
And the exploder basically acts like a creeper.
Oh my god.
But ultimately, the way you deal with the weaker family of mutations is all the same. Keep your distance and do everything you can to not take them out near you or any of your teammates. While other mutations such as tall boys must be dealt with quite differently depending on the variant. The ones with a weak point on the back of their big arm are intentionally designed to encourage and reward teamwork.
¿Cuánto me estás muriendo, brother?
Getting out of their way and taking potshots at them is definitely an option, but a well-coordinated team will be able to take out a tallboy or a bruiser more effectively by working together and positioning themselves in a way where its weak spot is left exposed to a player with a high damage weapon. But if it gets too close, you could also use an offensive item or pray that its health is low enough.
Oh my god, casi me mata.
Whereas with the Crusher, who grabs and squeezes the life out of cleaners, the most effective strategy is to juke them by running circles around them and staying on the side of their baby arm.
Kite around the zombie, kite around the tall boy. Corra, Jaimito, corra!
Baje.
Corra!
Eso es
Corra,
un
torero,
movimiento
torero!
Oh my god, que leyenda. Baje.
As you could probably tell by the footage I've shown so far, to the untrained eye, it's kinda hard to tell the variants apart at first glance. You know how in nature, a few spots are all that distinguish a perfectly safe and pettable frog from one that can blind you or something? The variants in Back 4 Blood kinda felt like that. The lack of immediately distinguishable silhouettes between the variants was heavily criticized by people, but I didn't mind it all that much since it made paying attention and learning the aesthetic differences between them very rewarding.
I missed every fucking shot. I missed every shot. Espérate, ¿cómo se te que se agarra?
Porque tiene la mierda en la garganta. Como debería ser la garganta.
The thing that wound up being, in my opinion, the most misunderstood aspect of Back 4 Blood was its card system. Many players never even gave it a chance and rejected it out of hand because they wanted the straightforward pick up and play fun of the Left 4 Dead games, which is perfectly valid, but if you actually get your teeth into it, you'll see that the card system creates countless opportunities for player expression and gives the game one of its most valuable qualities. It's replayability. I'm the type of person who would rather have a 20-hour game that I could keep playing for 100 hours than a 100-hour game, and in this aspect, Back 4 Blood is brilliant. At the start of every map, the game will randomly draw several corruption cards that fundamentally change how you deal with certain enemies and tackle levels.
Enfrente a la derecha. Uy.
Puta,
Izquierda. ¿Por qué derecha? ¡Hay tantos!
Forcing you to constantly adapt to curveball after curveball and ensuring that no two runs are ever exactly the same. However, what ended up contributing the most to why I kept coming back to the game was the insane amount of customization that can be done on the player side of things. You have 12 different characters to choose from, each with their own unique passives and starting weapons, as well as dozens upon dozens of cards to make some really fun builds that make each run feel distinct and fresh.
Deck building's fun. Yeah, but the problem is with Back 4 Blood, all of the cards are just kind of the same shit. It's just like percentage increases. That's like the least fun version of like perks in deck building.
You got the things you'd expect, like increased damage or extra health, but the game is also filled to the brim with a ton of genuinely creative cards that can be combined to create some really unique builds with very different playstyles. For example, a few of the decks my friends and I went with over the years included a Grenadier build with Hoffman, allowing you to take out special mutations with ease and even melt bosses with a few nades.
Juan, haz tu magia. Juan, qué leyenda. Ahí estamos.
A medical build with Doc to keep your teammates alive through conventional methods as well as unconventional ones. And a melee/mobility build with Holly, ideal for zooming around the map completing objectives and great at zombie training and dealing with large herds of commons. And that's not even touching on some of the crazy stuff the community came up with. However, the builds that truly made me fall in love with the card system were my Carly and Jim builds. I made a really fun sniper build with Jim, which sacrificed my character's health and mobility in favor of raw damage and weak point damage.
¡Uy, que ese daño, cabrón! ¡Que ese puto daño! Let's go!
Some abilities that stood out in the deck included Knowledge is Power, which allowed me to see a mutation's health bar and was very helpful when assessing threats in the heat of the moment.
No, muerto.
Then there's also Patient Hunter, which increases damage by 10% with every second you aim down your sights, and Jim's passive, which gives a small damage boost for every headshot elimination, but takes it away if you get hit.
Mi fucking passive.
In other words, my Jim build was excellent at taking out mutations with a few well-placed shots, but left me vulnerable against commons, which meant that I had to rely heavily on my team to be effective.
Solo quítame los normales, puta.
The deck's playstyle encouraged me to take it slow and try to stay a little further away from the action than a lot of other builds.
I fucking got it. Lo mató, Héctor, lo mató. I fucking got it. Oh my god.
¿Cómo lo mataste?
Qué crack.
On the other hand, my SMG Carly deck was the complete opposite. She didn't really do that much meaningful damage, but was great at juking specials and keeping the horde off the team thanks to two things. The overwhelming amount of speed cards that I ran with her, including ones that removed the movement penalty you normally get when you're not moving forward, sped her up while firing, and even allowed her to sprint while firing, and admin reload. Essentially, what admin reload does is that it makes it so the weapon you're not currently using gets reloaded while you have it holstered, resulting in an incredibly frenetic and fast-paced playstyle with little to no downtime between magazines, where you simply alternate back and forth between your primary and secondary weapons. It's a ton of fun, and when I later paired it with Power Swap, which temporarily grants a pretty significant damage buff when you change weapons in the exact moment your ammo gets low, made it even better. And the sound effect that plays when you get it right is just like, fucking nice. I feel like making and tweaking a deck for a playstyle tailor-made by you, for you, is where a lot of the game's appeal stems from. My heart sinks when I hear people talking about how they copy-pasted a build from a guide or a forum post once you've unlocked most of the cards. I can't help but think you'd be depriving yourself of a big reason the game really clicked with me. Some of my fondest memories with Back 4 Blood involved hanging out in Fort Hope with my friends while we all modified our decks to see how we could further optimize them after failing a run.
Hector, está flash, cabrón.
Yo necesito cambiar mi deck, este deck está fatal para Nightmare.
Same here.
And then giving each other constructive feedback on how to make it even better.
Y me ayudó que te quité esa porque si necesitamos la ganada.
¿Y qué es lo que te da
Puta,
por quitarte eso? Explícame, Jaime.
250 revive speed.
Pero ya es rápido en sí.
No, porque esa carta es bien útil, ¿vale?
Sí, ya.
Es la razón que le estoy reviendo a todos de un solo, man.
Seeing all these pages may seem a little daunting, but I think the game does a good job at drip feeding them to you and organizing them in such a way that it's not too overwhelming. There was just something really exciting about discovering a card that fit like a glove with a specific build than daydreaming about how it would perform in the field. And what better way to put our builds to the test than by doing a run in the hardest difficulty at the time, Nightmare. So once we beat Veteran with what we thought were some pretty solid builds, that's exactly what we did.
Easy. Vamos a ver el otro.
OG Nightmare was fucking bullshit, dude. There's no sugarcoating this. And it's not just because of bugs, which Back 4 Blood very much had.
It fucking teleported me! That's fucking bullshit!
Including one the community dubbed Phantom Bullets, which made it so non-fully automatic weapons would sometimes fire blanks, and was something you definitely did not want in a difficulty where every bullet counts. But the main reason Nightmare was so frustrating was because the difficulty was broken at a fundamental level. Normally, to keep things fair, the way video game enemies work is that the stronger an enemy is, the less of them you can throw at the player concurrently. And the weaker they are, the more of them you can bunch together. And with these types of horde shooters like Back 4 Blood, the challenge stems from multitasking and shifting priorities, having to deal with a bunch of weak zombies and a few strong specials at the same time. The way OG Nightmare was set up, however, made it so players had to deal with both never-ending commons and never-ending specials. While their spawn rate is definitely higher here, specials spawn a lot more frequently in Back 4 Blood than in most other games in the genre, in every difficulty. This was something I actually really enjoyed, since it led to some really chaotic fights, but in a difficulty where enemies do an absurd amount of damage,
Me mataron, cabrón.
corruption cards are more plentiful, and resources are a lot scarcer, it's just ridiculous. OG Nightmare was a battle of attrition. The game pulled no punches and threw everything at you from start to finish, non-stop, without accounting for the fact that in the early levels of an act, players were at their weakest, with low-tier weapons and only a few cards from their deck in play.
Fuck this? No! I couldn't even get out of spawn! No!
The problem wasn't only that the enemies were too strong, but that the player was also too weak. We attempted the levels before the first checkpoint on Nightmare every night for weeks, and we just could not get past Pain Train.
Each time when I come here, I am abused.
Ay, sí, vale verga.
No matter what we did, the result was always the same. And with every death and failed run, our frustrations with the difficulty became greater and greater.
Este juego es una mierda, maje.
Until finally...
Bueno, yo lo voy a decir ahorita por la salud mental de Jaime. Si este run falla, ya aquí desinstalo el juego.
No, hombre, no desinstalar, pero ya hasta acá dejo.
No desinstalar.
No, sí, desinstalar, weón.
Es que maje, es una pendejada de juegos.
Sí.
Pero no se disfruta, cabrón, no se puede disfrutar, maje. ¿Qué vas a disfrutar de este juego si no te estás muriendo cada rato?
Ya lo agarro. Puta, me tocó
Oh my god, que me funciona, me morí.
Maje, este juego es una pendejada. Mira, ¿cómo me va a morir ahí?
Oh, motherfucker, corre.
En la época de Cold War era las mujeres dominaban. ¿Cómo morimos?
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Oh my god! Oh my god! No grenade!
Maje. Oh my god, ayuda, ayuda. Atrás de usted,
Oh my god!
Holy shit.
¡Ay!
Y agarró enfrente mío, me agarró.
What?
Porque hay tantos stickers. No, vamos.
Corre. Me están disparando a mí, imbécil.
Corre. ¿Qué puede ser el paso? Cuidado con sleeper, este punto solo watch out for sleepers.
Hay un top, güey.
Hay un top, güey, arriba, ya.
Wait him out.
Oh! Get juke! Oh my god, it's
Total, ya aprendimos que solo speedrun se puede hacer esto.
That's not the right lesson to take from this.
Alguien que siguiera órdenes. Imposible vencer a los enfocados por cansancio.
The big appeal of Back 4 Blood for me was being able to tackle the game the way I wanted to. Being given a toolbox and a challenge, and then having the freedom to choose what I want to use. But unfortunately, the only way to reliably complete levels in OG Nightmare was by having everyone in your team running a speedrunning deck and leaving the specials, the zombies, and your dignity far behind you. And we simply did not want to do that. My group's playstyle was always more about taking things slow and steady, meticulously traversing the map while taking out everything in our way. And this was a playstyle that was just way too punishing in OG Nightmare.
What the fuck? Que van a hacer poner Evangelo.
Me gusta que es speedrun para ganar solo un strat, no es nada flexible.
Everyone in the community was in agreement, including the developers, and in December of 2021, Nightmare got a complete revamp.
So if you've been struggling or getting destroyed, the game's about to get a lot easier.
New Nightmare once again allowed players to experiment with their builds while still dishing out some serious punishment for poor tactics or messing up.
Ah, fuck, fallé de presa.
It was tough, but fair. We went from spending almost a month completing an act to being able to get it done in a few nights. And here's the thing, I don't know how to articulate this without sounding like a spoiled child or someone who's going through Stockholm Syndrome, but I kinda miss OG Nightmare. The furthest we ever got on it was just before the first checkpoint in Act 2, and the only reason we managed to get that far in the first place was thanks to our Holly player. The rest of us felt a little useless sometimes, but once it was gone, it just wasn't the same.
Pero sí, well, that wasn't as satisfying, cabrón.
Mira, yo no sé tú, Héctor, pero nos morimos un chingo, cabrón.
Sí, no, estamos a punto de perder.
A huevo, sí. Pero la cosa es de que sí, después de andar semanas en esto y por fin toparlo, I don't know, I feel like I cheated.
Sí, no se siente bien, ¿no?
By December, I had logged at least 100 hours in the game, and I was yearning for a greater challenge than what was on offer. And despite how blatantly broken it was, OG Nightmare was the closest thing to what I wanted. Ironically enough, the unfairness of it made it all the more satisfying when you finally beat a level you were stuck on for days.
Se acabó la mierda.
Let's fucking go.
Verga. Ay, ese verga.
Cabrón.
I feel like, in an effort to quell players' outrage, Turtle Rock overcorrected the difficulty and, as a result, ended up alienating their most committed players. Slowly but surely, I eventually warmed up to the difficulty, even completing a couple full runs with random, something I never would have attempted with OG Nightmare, but I never stopped missing that amazing feeling of overcoming insurmountable odds and having to fight tooth and nail for every win. OG Nightmare had a lot of issues, no doubt about it, but its removal left a void in the game which the developers hope to fill with a brand new difficulty.
Oh shit.
Oh my god.
¡Pátalo un golpe!
¡Maje! ¡Ay!
¡Que no le pegue!
Ese cerote lo mató a todos uno por uno.
Yo tenía full health. Todos tenían full health.
No Hope brought with it the greater challenge I was yearning for, but with a twist. Enemies were now ridiculously overpowered, even more than how they were in OG Nightmare, but then again, so were you.
¡Maje, no va a matar, cabrón!
Oh my god!
In previous difficulties, players would slowly build their deck up by drawing a card at the start of each level. As you kept drawing more and more cards, acquiring stronger weapons, and buying team upgrades with currency that can be found scattered throughout the levels, you felt this great sense of getting exponentially stronger. However, when the difficulty is cranked all the way up, this had the unintended effect of the first couple levels of each act being infinitely more challenging than the later ones. Like, back in OG Nightmare, once we had the core of our deck in place, we took roughly the same number of sessions clearing the rest of Act 1 as we did getting to the first checkpoint.
We made it to the title screen, boys.
So, considering the absurd difficulty of the mode, giving No Hope players the entirety of their 15-card deck right from the get-go made a lot of sense.
Honestamente, me hacía falta esto. Excelente, me gusta.
It allowed the developers to go crazy with the damage values, spawn rates, and the number of corruption cards that could be in play at once without it feeling unfair.
¡Spawn enfrente de nosotros, loco!
I do think they may have gone too far in a few places, and a part of me still wishes we also got a more refined version of OG Nightmare as well, with its classic card system, but overall, I think No Hope was a great addition. It really reignited my enthusiasm for the game, bringing back those magical moments of failing a level over and over, and then going, this is the one, before failing it again.
Okay, este es el resto. Este es el strat.
And simply repeating that process until finally being able to beat it.
¡Vámonos, señores!
Entren.
Yo le empujo. ¡Vamos! Se pudo.
Only this time, that's where it caused by refusing to play by the quote-unquote meta, bugs, or poorly thought-out balancing, but instead because we fucking suck at the game.
Ay, Dios mío.
¿Qué fue eso, cabrón? Verás qué va a pasar cuando los tres te disparan en una dirección. Eso fue tan troll, cabrón. No.
Thankfully, Turtle Rock invested a great deal of time into removing most of the really frustrating bugs, modifying the hitboxes so stuff like this wouldn't happen anymore.
Uy, ¿cómo lo haces?
What?
Adding some quality of life features like an indicator that lets players know when they're facing an endless horde, which eliminated the guesswork that came from certain regular hordes becoming endless in higher difficulties.
Creo que Nightmare solo no para el horde, maje.
No, sí para. Eventualmente tiene que parar.
As well as some much appreciated balance changes to some of the specials abilities, such as reducing the duration of the stumble that occurs when a stalker pounces on a teammate who's close to you, maintaining its function of punishing players for clumping up, but not being so long that by the time you gain control of your character, you're pretty much dead already.
Holy fuck!
The only changes I'm not a fan of was the removal of some fun exploits like bunny hopping and the 200 IQ strat of getting past an alarm door without triggering it by having the zombies on the other side break it. That was fun. I miss that. As well as a decision to roll down No Hope's full deck to all other difficulties. It didn't seem to get a lot of pushback by the community, but I really disliked it. I felt like it trivialized the lower difficulties for experienced players, simplified a good chunk of the strategy that came from deck building, as the order of your cards wasn't relevant anymore.
Esa mierda no la consigo hasta como el cuarto nivel, de que it's useful pero no me da mucho daño. Y ahorita sí, necesita el daño.
And made No Hope less of a novelty. Honestly, Back 4 Blood has gone through so many drastic balance changes over the years that I'm also disappointed we didn't get in-depth difficulty customization options for the campaign akin to what Project Zomboid and State of Decay 2 had. We did get the Trial of the Worm game mode, which kinda scratches that itch, but isn't the same. However, despite a few hiccups and kind of a big one, I still think the post-launch support was pretty great. We also saw the release of a bunch of new cards, some fun cosmetics, enemies and variants, as well as 3 expansions that could be enjoyed by players who didn't purchase them if at least one person in your team did. Children of the Worm and River of Blood each had an additional act with new levels that take place in locations that look and feel completely different from the ones in the main game. They also offer more diverse mission objectives, such as an open-ended level that has you looking for parts to fix a boat in the order you want, and one that has you defend a payload through a mine.
Somos idiotas.
The only real issue I have with these two is that I wish they were combined into a single act, since I feel like their short length undermines the game's player progression mechanics. Finally, Tunnels of Terror added optional dungeons that spawn randomly throughout the campaign. They all take place inside dangerous underground hives, but offer some great loot if you're able to clear them.
Come here, bitch! That's fun.
They're pretty fun and help to add even more replayability to the game. But I wouldn't recommend tackling them on your first playthrough, since going into a hive at the start or middle of a level means that you'd be skipping to the next one once you cleared it, missing out on the real meat of the game. Around the same time this expansion came out, one-time use cards were also introduced, which I really loved. They were a great way to reward players for accumulating supply points and doing optional objectives, and let you tilt the scales to your favor if you felt like you hit a brick wall in the higher difficulties. However, the most notable one definitely has to be the one that lets you add additional continues to a run. It's rare and expensive enough that you can't just spam them to cheese your way through a campaign without first paying your dues, but made it so players are able to maintain the momentum and hype of beating an especially tough level without having to go back to the previous checkpoint if they fail to reach the next one.
Oh, God.
Ahora, solo el resto tiene que ser flawless. Tranquilos.
Fácil. Hueputa.
Even at its buggiest and most unpolished state, and despite what a frustrating experience it could be at times, I always kept coming back to Back 4 Blood. The gameplay was simply that appealing for me. I loved how fast-paced and chaotic it was, how it felt like everyone in the team had a critical role to play and really had to pull their weight in order to succeed, how after unlocking my first SWAT skin, I just wanted to do it all again with a different build and cleaner. Hell, I even grew very fond of its cast of characters. Yes, I agree that they can say some really cringy stuff sometimes.
De hecho, desde ahora pueden llamarme lista, super lista.
¿Qué puta es ese line de Holly? What the fuck?
And start monologuing about their past in the worst possible moments, but they still really clicked with me and bounced off each other pretty well despite the possible team combinations being insanely high. I loved the dark humor that came from Hoffman recounting his oddly traumatic childhood stories so nonchalantly.
Those kids were fine, not a lot of scarring.
And how everyone but Evangelo is so sick of hearing about his conspiracy theories.
I've always wanted to know what was in Area 51.
You've been spending too much time around certain people.
How instead of apologizing for damaging another cleaner, Carly will blame them for getting in the way, and how her abrasive personality causes her and Holly to banter all the time.
Sabes que Carly arderá si pisa terrenos sagrados, ¿verdad?
No me acordaba de esa línea.
And how every cleaner has their own reasons for helping out and stuff they miss from their old lives. I agree with everyone else that the character dynamics were stronger in the tight-knit crews of Left 4 Dead, but there's still plenty to like here. And that's, in a nutshell, my main argument. I know what it feels like to be given a title that claims to be the new and improved version of something you hold dear, but is so far removed from that original experience that you can't help but spite it.
Next time, baby.
I think this is the reason why Back 4 Blood became the cool thing to hate for a while. And while I could break down every point I disagree with from a bunch of these videos, or go on and on about the stuff they got wrong,
the snitch isn't just annoying and uninspired, it's poor game design. No matter what, you have to alert the snitch, so there's no charm or fairness. You can't prevent it or outsmart it, so it comes off as an annoying obstacle instead of a dynamic, fair foe.
I think I could kill it alone.
But I'd just be wasting your time, since the core of their argument is completely valid. Everything from the marketing to the developer interviews told them they were getting a sequel to the Left 4 Dead games, some of the most influential and beloved titles of the 360 generation, and which thousands, including me, have an enormous fondness for. Left 4 Dead immersed you into feeling like you and your friends were playing a bombastic zombie movie with great gore effects and little downtime, whereas Back 4 Blood is a lot more complicated. As a result of the game's focus on player choice, everything from your build, your character, your weapon attachments, and even if you choose to pull your money together to buy a team upgrade in the safe room vendor,
Jaime, qué generoso, 5 monedas, Dios mío. Are you sure?
Makes a big impact on your team's performance. And while this new focus obviously appealed to me, I completely understand why it didn't appeal to big Left 4 Dead fans. However, if you're able to see Back 4 Blood as its own thing and go into it with that expectation, there's plenty of fun to be had here. I've made some amazing memories with this game. Looking back on Back 4 Blood almost a year after development for it officially ended, I can confidently say that while there's definitely room for improvement, I was very happy with what we got. And in its current state and price point, I can easily recommend it, especially if you bring some friends along.
Those times when you're completely hoarded by zombies, right? And feel like you're not gonna make it. And then somehow, you and your team manage to pull it all together and survive. It's an awesome feeling. It's an adrenaline rush.
No! Jaime, corre al safe room, está allá. Just go.
It's one of those moments that make you want to slap your buddies on the back and cheer and have a beer.
Oh my fucking god. ¿Qué le dije?
That's the video. Hope you liked it. Feel free to subscribe. The next video is going to be No More Mental Health 2. And I'm going to make a second channel. Y va a ser exactamente lo mismo, pero en español. Oh, and I'm going to be putting a PayPal link in the description as well. If you donate like $1 or something, I'll put your name in the next one. But yeah, hope you liked it. I'm out.